You again, Judge Whitmore muttered, flipping through the case file like it was a sandwich wrapper. Typical. The courtroom laughed quietly, the sound more chilling than a scream. Darius Langston stood there tall, clean-cut, no handcuffs, no record, just a citation for what they claimed was interfering with a public investigation. His only crime? Asking why his best friend was being frisked on the sidewalk like a threat. But in Whitmore's court, the accusation was enough. The judge didn't look up as he leaned into the mic. Let's get this over with. State your name for the record. Darius's voice was calm but razor sharp. Darius Xavier Langston, clerk to Chief Justice Elena Morales of the United States Supreme Court. The silence cracked like glass. The prosecutor, a junior ADA named Miles Rourke, glanced at his notes, confused. The gallery went still, like someone had cut the oxygen. Whitmore finally looked up. His eyes narrowed. Say again. I'm not here to be railroaded through your kangaroo court, Darius said, his hands folded neatly before him. I'm here to document everything. For the federal bench. And for the future. 2 months earlier, none of this had existed. Darius was working long days in D.C., reading briefs, researching precedent, living his dream. He had earned at Yale Law, full ride, law review editor, the works. Every box checked, every hurdle cleared. But when he flew home to Atlanta for his mother's 60th birthday, he wasn't wearing his credentials on his chest. He was just another black man on a Georgia sidewalk. They stopped him outside a diner. For officers, no badge numbers offered. His friend Marcus was up against the wall, hands spread, and when Darius asked what law had been broken, one of them told him to back the hell up unless you want to go too. So he did, and he went. He spent the night in a holding cell, not allowed a phone call, stripped of his wallet, ID, and dignity. But not his memory. He remembered the cop's badge number anyway. He remembered every face. And he remembered this judge. Whitmore was known in legal circles for a lot of things: expedited hearings, quick verdicts, and a conviction rate higher than the city average by a suspicious margin. But he was also known for his disdain, sometimes whispered, sometimes broadcast, for what he called urban theatrics. Now he sat straighter in his chair, tried to adjust his robe like it might shield him from what he'd just heard. This court operates on facts, not titles, he said, a brittle edge in his voice. You could be the Pope. Doesn't change the charge. Darius tilted his head. Actually, it changes everything. Because I filed a civil rights complaint with the DOJ against the officers and against this court. And today, I'm representing myself. The courtroom murmured again, like a rising tide. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel once, maybe more for himself than for order. Let's proceed, he snapped. If this is your idea of a stunt, it won't work. But Darius wasn't stunting. He had transcripts of prior hearings. Whitmore had presided over cases with young black defendants, many of them first-time offenders, all of them sentenced harshly. He had statistics. He had body cam footage the police had failed to submit into evidence until Darius, through federal subpoena, made them cough it up. And more importantly, he had history. His grandfather was a freedom rider. His mother taught African American studies. His father had been pulled over too many times to count. Darius wasn't just fighting for himself. He was the blade sharpened over generations of struggle. The prosecutor looked visibly nervous now. Your Honor, in light of new information, the state would like to request a continuance. No, Whitmore interrupted, jaw clenched. He wants a hearing? He'll get one. So it began. Darius cross-examined the arresting officer first. Cool, methodical. Officer Klein, did you inform me of my rights at the time of arrest? The cop hesitated. Not at that exact moment, no. Did you have probable cause? He was interfering with. Speaking isn't interference, is it? The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the officer fumbled, then stammered, then looked at the prosecutor for help. None came. Whitmore's face twitched. "Objection," Rourke tried weakly, badgering the witness. "Sustained," Whitmore said, but his voice faltered. Darius continued undeterred. Later, he called witnesses, people on the street who'd filmed the incident, local store owners who vouched for his behavior, and finally Marcus, who described in detail how Darius had tried to de-escalate the situation, not ignite it. Whitmore's grip on the bench loosened by the minute. Then came a moment Darius dropped the real bomb. "This court has a pattern, Your Honor," he said, lifting a file. "I obtained 35 case transcripts. In 29 of them, the defendants were people of color. 27 received maximum sentencing. That's circumstantial," Whitmore barked. Is it the pattern of a bench blinded by bias?" Dead silence. Darius placed a small voice recorder on the table. "This audio file contains a leaked conversation between a bailiff and a clerk from your court. In it, they joke about how black kids never stand a chance under Whitmore. Should I play it?" "Mr. Langston." "No, Your Honor. I think you've spoken enough." When court adjourned for lunch, Darius stayed seated. He didn't want the applause from the gallery. He didn't want attention. He wanted accountability. Outside, the story was already catching fire. Reporters were circling. Civil rights attorneys were calling. The DOJ had dispatched a rep to sit in the gallery. And Judge Whitmore? He looked shaken, like a man who just realized the robe didn't make him untouchable anymore. But this was only the beginning. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed, but Darius sat alone at the edge of the hallway, sipping coffee that tasted like paper and rust. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, not from nerves but calculation. He knew today wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about opening a door that had been nailed shut for decades. An older black woman in a navy pantsuit approached quietly and took a seat beside him. She set down her bag before speaking. "You don't know me," she said, her voice low and firm, "but I'm from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. Assistant Deputy Marshal. My name's Latrice Hammond, and I've been following your case since yesterday." Darius nodded once, eyes still forward. "Figured they'd send someone." "We were already investigating Judge Whitmore," she said, cutting to the point. "Your testimony today, it moved the needle. Fast, but I'm going to be straight with you. He's powerful, has friends in the Fifth Circuit, the kind that get real quiet when we come around. I didn't start this fight to finish it safe," Darius said. "I started it to finish it right." Hammond offered a smile, brief but genuine. "Then you've already done more than most." Back in the courtroom, the air had changed. The seats were packed. The press was here now, whispering into phones, typing frantically. Judge Whitmore returned 20 minutes late, a first in his 22-year career. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His gavel struck, but it didn't command the room the way it used to. "The court will resume hearing testimony in the matter of State versus Langston," he announced. "Mr. Langston, you may proceed." Darius stood, file in hand. "Your Honor, I would like to call an expert witness." Whitmore blinked. "You're calling a witness?" "For a misdemeanor obstruction charge." Darius didn't blink. "Yes, sir. I'm calling Dr. Helen Darnell, professor of criminal justice at Spelman College, specializing in systemic bias in sentencing practices." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Dr. Darnell walked in, a short, round woman in a burgundy blazer, her silver afro gleaming like a crown. She walked straight to the stand and swore in. "Dr. Darnell," Darius began, "you've reviewed 35 sentencing records from this court, correct?" "I have," she said, "including the judge's remarks and the stated justification for sentencing length." "And what did you conclude?" Darnell adjusted her glasses. "There is a demonstrable pattern of racial disparity in sentencing, particularly in nonviolent misdemeanor cases. Judge Whitmore's court issues harsher penalties to defendants of color by a statistically significant margin. "Objection!" the prosecutor shouted, standing now red in the face. "This isn't a trial on judicial conduct." Whitmore looked like he wanted to sustain the objection, but the eyes in the room were on him, now not with respect, but suspicion. He coughed. "I'll allow it for now." Darnell continued. "The disparity exceeds federal threshold for statistical anomalies. This is not an outlier. It is a pattern." Darius turned back to the judge. "And a pattern reveals more than a moment, doesn't it?" Whitmore was silent. As court recessed for the day, the whispers turned to headlines. "Law clerk calls out systemic racism in live courtroom showdown." "Sitting judge accused of pattern of bias DOJ, investigation underway." The black Yale grad who stood alone in court and won. Outside the courthouse, Darius was surrounded by a growing crowd, some supporters, some protesters, but all watching. A young girl, maybe 15, stepped forward, clutching a spiral notebook. "You the guy from TV?" she asked, voice small. He crouched down slightly. "I'm the guy in court." "What's your name?" "Raya," she said. "My big brother's in jail." He said his judge was Whitmore. He said it wasn't fair. He cried on the phone. "I didn't think anyone could do anything." Darius looked her dead in the eyes. "Someone always can. Sometimes they just need to be reminded." That night, Whitmore went home to a house that suddenly felt too large. His wife didn't speak to him during dinner. His son didn't call. The front porch light flickered for hours. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and sat in his study, staring at the black-robed photo of himself on the wall, surrounded by awards. They didn't comfort him anymore. He didn't know how to name the feeling in his chest, but it was cold and growing. At the Supreme Court, Elena Morales was watching the hearing on a secure feed in her office. She didn't smile, but she picked up the phone. "Bring him home," she said to her clerk coordinator. "We've got work to do." The next morning, Darius returned to court. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He wore a gray hoodie and jeans, the same clothes he was arrested in. He wanted the jury of public opinion to see exactly what Judge Whitmore had seen when he dismissed him as typical, but his eyes still burned with the same light. Whitmore looked up. His face had aged 5 years overnight. "I've reviewed the footage," the judge said, voice low, "and I've also been contacted by the Justice Department. Given new evidence, the court hereby dismisses the charges against Mr. Langston. The arresting officers will be subject to further review by Internal Affairs." There was a long pause. Then, he hesitated, "have requested a temporary leave from the bench, effective immediately." The court was dead silent. Darius stood still. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat, because this wasn't a victory. Not yet. It was an opening. He walked out of the courthouse that day into a wave of cameras. His phone buzzed with dozens of missed calls, media, lawyers, senators. But he ignored them. He walked 2 blocks to the park near the courthouse, sat on a bench, and finally exhaled. He was still breathing, still standing. And this fight was far from over. The fallout from the courtroom shook more than just Atlanta. By evening, clips from the trial had gone viral across every major platform. Legal pundits debated it on national television. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like Langston Effect and Judging the Judge. For Darius, it wasn't noise. It was clarity. The next day, he returned to Washington. He didn't head straight to his apartment. Instead, he went to his office inside the marble halls of the Supreme Court. The smell of polished oak, the sound of dignified silent sight reminded him of the weight of every word written in a ruling, every precedent shaped by courage or cowardice. Chief Justice Elena Morales was already waiting for him in her chambers. "You made a lot of enemies," she said without looking up from her files. Darius stood straight. "I've never had much use for popularity." She looked up then, studied him. "Good," she said simply, "because you also made history." She gestured for him to sit. I've been fielding calls from circuit judges, state AGs, even a few senators. They want to talk to you, hear from you. I'm not interested in being a mascot, he said, or a media darling. I want systemic change. Morales leaned back in her chair. Then you've come to the right building. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thick binder. I'm assigning you to a special review task force. We're launching an internal audit of federal judicial bias patterns, using your case as a framework. Darius blinked. Wait, that's real. Morales gave a dry smile. You opened the door. I'm just pushing it wider. For the next 3 weeks, Darius buried himself in research, hearings, briefings. He met with ethics boards, sat with victims of wrongful convictions, spoke to young law students at HBCUs across the country. He even flew back to Atlanta not to testify, but to visit Marcus, who had since filed a civil suit against the city for unlawful detainment. I didn't know you had that in UD, Marcus said, shaking his head as they sat on a cracked bench outside their old high school. I didn't either, Darius admitted, but I knew we couldn't keep swallowing this. Not another generation. What if they come for you next? Marcus asked. Darius paused. Then I'll already be standing when they try. Meanwhile, Judge Whitmore's world crumbled. Under pressure from civil rights groups and a DOJ inquiry, he faced a judiciary conduct panel. His sentencing history was audited. Lawyers he'd humiliated in court came forward with affidavits. Even some of his former clerks offered damning testimony, anonymous, but sharp. The man who once commanded total obedience from his courtroom was now seen as a relic of an era fighting extinction. When asked to defend his record, Whitmore gave a short, bitter statement. I've always followed the law as I interpreted it. If society changes its mind about what justice looks like, maybe I wasn't meant to serve in it anymore. It didn't save him. 3 weeks later, he resigned, not just from the bench, but from the bar entirely. But Darius wasn't finished. He published a long-form article in the Harvard Law Review titled, The Hidden Gavel, Structural Racism and Judicial Authority in American Courts. It spread like wildfire through legal circles. In it, he didn't just recount his own experience, he laid out data, precedent, and proposals. The final paragraph read, Justice is not blind. It's just been looking the other way. But if enough of us raise our hands not in surrender, but to be sworn in maybe, just maybe, we can remind the system who it's supposed to serve. A month later, he was called to testify before a joint congressional committee. His suit was pressed, his voice steady, his heart pounding. Senator Delgado, a conservative from Texas, sneered from his seat. So what you're saying is that you believe the majority of state-level judges are inherently racist? Darius didn't flinch. No, Senator. I'm saying that many judges operate in a system designed to reward unchecked bias and discourage accountability. That's not a character flaw. That's architecture. Delgado huffed. You make it sound like the entire justice system is broken. Darius leaned into the mic. If your roof leaks every time it rains, how long before you stop blaming the clouds? The room went silent. He left the hearing to a standing ovation from activists in the back. But back in Atlanta, the real test was still unfolding. The young girl from before Raya had mailed him a letter. Her brother's sentencing hearing had been moved. With Whitmore gone, a new judge would hear the appeal. She asked if Darius could be there. So he went. The courtroom was smaller, less dramatic. No press, no fanfare. But as Darius walked in, the new judge, an older black woman named Judge Mabel Gaines, nodded at him. She knew. Raya's brother, Khalil, was resentenced that day. The harsh 6-month term reduced to time served and probation. He would walk out of jail that week. Outside, Raya ran up and hugged Darius. I told him you'd come, she whispered. And Darius, exhausted, changed but still burning, whispered back, always. That night, Back in D.C., as he sat by his window watching the city lights flicker, Darius thought about legacy. Not the marble halls, not the robes, but the fight, the resistance, the decision to speak up, even when your voice shakes. Especially then. He picked up his pen and wrote the first line of his next article. We are not asking for justice. We are demanding it. And this time, the whole country was listening. 3 months later, a Supreme Court hearing drew national attention, one that would set a precedent not only in law, but in conscience. The case, Reynolds versus State of Georgia class action lawsuit challenging systemic racial disparities in misdemeanor sentencing. The court had agreed to hear it in full session, and though Darius wasn't arguing the case, his fingerprints were on every page. He sat just 2 rows behind the podium, flanked by legal scholars, journalists, and civil rights leaders who had followed his journey since the moment he uttered his full name in Judge Whitmore's courtroom. As oral arguments began, Darius felt a hand lightly press against his shoulder. He turned. It was Chief Justice Elena Morales. Whatever happens in there, she said softly, know this. You've already moved the scales. He nodded, but said nothing. Not out of humility, just knew it wasn't over yet. Inside the chamber, the lawyer for the plaintiffs delivered a blistering critique of state-level judicial discretion and its disproportionate impact on communities of color. She cited studies, Darnell's expert data, and even the public transcript from Darius's own hearing. On the opposing side, the defense, backed by a coalition of state, ACE argued for judicial autonomy and warned against crippling overcorrection. But the justices weren't swayed easily. Justice Barker, an old-school originalist, asked, are we to assume that racial bias infects every courtroom in the country? To which the plaintiff's counsel responded, without missing a beat, we don't have to assume. The data confirms it. And even one infected verdict is a rot at the core of equal protection. It was the kind of moment that echoed. When the hearing adjourned, Darius stepped outside and faced a crowd of microphones. He had refused interviews for weeks, but today, he made an exception. Let me be clear, he said. This is not a personal victory. It's a public reckoning. Our legal system doesn't just need repair, it needs reimagining. We cannot keep asking Black and brown communities to trust a scale that's never tipped in their favor. One reporter yelled out, do you think the court will rule in your favor? Darius looked straight into the camera. I'm not interested in their favor. I'm interested in their honesty. Weeks passed, then months. The country held its breath as the justices deliberated behind closed doors. Public protests and rallies surged. Celebrities joined the movement. Politicians scrambled to pick sides. Darius, meanwhile, went quiet. Not because he gave up, but because he was preparing for what came next, win or lose. One morning, he woke before sunrise. The air outside his apartment was thick with early summer humidity. He sat at the edge of his bed, phone in hand, waiting for the ruling. 8 a.m. The decision dropped. 63 in favor of the plaintiffs. Reynolds versus State of Georgia would become one of the most significant civil rights rulings in modern judicial history. The decision mandated independent review boards for sentencing in every state within 3 years, a federal system of data reporting by race, gender, and class, creation of a National Judicial Oversight Commission with teeth. The majority opinion, penned by Chief Justice Morales, cited not only legal precedent but the lived experiences of those silenced by injustice. It even referenced Darius's law review article by name. That evening, the courthouse steps in Atlanta filled again, only this time, not with protest, but with celebration. Marcus was there, free and smiling, arms slung over his sister's shoulder. Dr. Darnell stood proudly beside a group of her students. Raya and Khalil held a hand-painted sign that read, We are not asking anymore. But Darius didn't show up. Not because he didn't care. Because he knew it wasn't about him anymore. He sat in a quiet diner 2 blocks away, sipping black coffee, watching the scene unfold on the TV in the corner. He was tired not in his body, but in his bones. The kind of tired you only feel after surviving something much larger than yourself. Latrice Hammond from the DOJ slid into the booth across from him without a word. She nodded toward the screen. "You did it." "No," Darius said. "We all did it. But it doesn't stop here." She smiled. "That's why I came. The Attorney General wants you in the next phase advising on the Oversight Commission. You'll be shaping the ethics code from the inside." Darius exhaled slowly. "I'll do it," he said, "but I want more than policy. I want teeth. Real ones. Subpoena power. Federal audit access. And I want community oversight, not just legal experts." "You'll get it," she said, "because now they know you're not bluffing." A year later, Darius stood at the podium at Howard Law's commencement. The same school his grandfather had once marched past in protest. The same campus his mother dreamed of teaching at. He looked out at hundreds of young, brilliant faces, black, brown, white, queer, disabled, immigrant, all hungry for change. "I'm not here to tell you that the law will save us," he began. "I'm here to remind you that we write it. We shape it. And if it fails us, we tear it down and build something better." Applause. We are not mistakes in the margin. We're the center of the story. We're the authors now. When the ceremony ended, students swarmed him, not for photos, but for guidance, for strategy, for hope. As Darius walked away from the podium, his phone buzzed. Another court, another case, another person who needed him to stand beside them. He smiled. The work would never be done, but neither would he. And miles away, in a quiet retirement community in Savannah, a man named Whitmore watched the speech from his television. Alone, forgotten. His drink sat untouched. His legacy rewritten. The robe that once made him feel invincible now gathered dust in a box beneath his bed. He turned off the screen before the applause ended. Not out of bitterness, but because somewhere deep inside, a truth had taken root, a truth he could no longer ignore. He had judged too quickly, and he had been wrong. And sometimes, even the bench must answer to the people. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.